Right, so we're going to do, just to let everyone know what the agenda is, we've got 20 minutes just to do a little introduction on my research that I did with Oxford Brookes. Then we'll do a bit of a breakout. I'm really interested to hear about your experience with endings. For those of you that haven't or aren't team coaches, please feel free to share your experience as a coach or a consultant. I've actually extended my research recently to executive coaching and also to OD consulting, so I'd be really interested in getting your points of view as well. And then we'll have 20 minutes where we can come back and have a conversation together and just for us to share our learnings. Hopefully by the end of the session, you'll be able to think about using your awareness to bring a team coaching relationship or indeed any coaching relationship to a close. The opportunity to understand your own practice and how you might integrate learning from endings. Certainly my research suggested that endings offer us an incredibly rich and fertile field in terms of reflexive practice. And then how to use your reflexivity and your experience of endings to develop your practice, and in particular looking at how you begin your work. So reflecting on the end to consider how you begin. So who am I? Based in the UK. I did my research, as I mentioned, at Oxford Brookes as part of my master's. It was my dissertation. And then I took that and it was published in a peer-reviewed journal. I do both executive and team coaching, mentoring, and I'm also a qualified supervisor. And I studied, as I mentioned, with Oxford Brookes. I've also studied with Ashridge and the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations and the Academy of Executive Coaching. I use an integrative approach. And as David Clutterbuck said, I would call myself a pracademic rather than a pure academic. It was a phenomenological study that I took. So it was an interpretive phenomenological analysis, which doesn't roll off the tongue easily. So we quite often say IPA for those of you who are familiar with it. It's a process, not a theory. It's very much an immersive learning experience. I did my research during the pandemic, which was quite an interesting experience. And I literally sort of watched movies about endings, read books about endings, looked at art on endings, just completely immersed myself in the whole topic. So it kind of became my life for about 6 months. And then out of the interviews that I did, and specifically around endings, I then developed those themes, made sense of each individual interview, then created overall themes. And really the point of the research wasn't to kind of come up with a new theory or methodology or to prove something. It was much more about exploring endings and looking at what endings mean to us as coaches. So it very much had the coach at the center of the research. And if you want to get a copy of it, that's the link there. But I'll also make sure that I get a copy across onto the resources so that you can get a copy there. I took this photograph in Iceland, which is one of my favorite places in the world. And I just love this statue. I mean, for me, it has so much meaning. It's so often, don't we work with clients who we feel that they have a sort of a lump of stone on their heads and we just want to lift it off. That reminds me of when I was immersed in my endings research and I was kind of in this little bubble in this world all of my own. So I always think that's just a lovely way of looking at how we sometimes are not as aware of what's going on around us as we could be. And as coaches, taking the time to kind of really think about endings and what they mean to us, what they mean to our clients is, as I say, really rich territory for us. So I'm quite passionate about it, as you can hear. For those of you who are not familiar with the term phenomenology, I found this description in this really great book by Sarah Bakewell. And I think it's a really lovely description of phenomenology. I mean, there are whole books written on it, but for me, this kind of brought it to life. So the sense that it's not, about the kind of the makeup of the cup or the coffee, but it's about the experience of lifting a cup of coffee to your mouth, drinking from it, feeling the weight of the cup in your hand, the flavor on your tongue, the sensations as you drink the coffee, the smell. And what I'm asking you to reflect on today is, when we're talking about endings, is to really think about your experience in this way. So rather than thinking about it in a sort of mechanistic way, to think about it, the experience of the ending and what it meant to you. I'm just going to check our chat because I see I've got brilliant, a couple of things there, but we'll make sure you get the research, so don't worry, we'll make sure that's passed around to everyone. So that just gives you a sense of what this study was about. And it's actually, for those of you that are interested in Gestalt coaching, obviously it's a very key part of that as well. And what I maybe can do as well is maybe share some reading for you that you might be interested in to follow up from that. So I mentioned that I did interviews, and I spent a lot of time immersing myself in the interviews, to the point where actually I could almost play them back verbatim in my mind. And having done the individual analysis and then the thematic analysis across all of the interviews, I was able to arrange the research into 3 different areas. And the area of coaching that I particularly studied was systemic team coaching. So this was coaching, business to business coaching relationships with leadership teams, and specifically people who had been trained in the systemic team coaching methodology or approach, which is Peter Hawkins' work. And I trained with Peter at the Academy of Executive Coaching, and also with John Leary Joyce and Hilary Lyons. So great experience. So they were the coaches that I particularly looked at, because one of the challenges with a lot of coaching research is it kind of lumps lots of different coaching approaches, methodologies, client base. So you get sports coaches mixed with business coaches. So I tried to really pull it down into quite a small group of people that had very similar experiences, so that I could really deep dive into it. So I came up with 3 areas to consider when we're looking at a team coaching relationship as they come to an end. So the first one was the team coach in the field. So that was the systemic relationship. So what I mean by that is the work that the coach is doing in the client's system, in the organization. The question that we often ask ourselves in team coaching is, who is the client? And if you ask any team coaches that question, they could probably sit and talk for at least an hour on that subject. I spent lots of time talking about that myself. So who is the client? Is it the stakeholders that the organization is serving? Is it the organization? Is it the sponsor? Is it the leader? Is it the team? Or is it all of those things? So I think that's really useful way of thinking about this. Then thinking about how you navigate the systemic forces. So what I looked at was the coach, if you like, was the sort of helping the team to navigate the power dynamics, the politics, the external environment. So the coach is there to help them find their way through the field, to deal with the cultural dimensions, of course, because many coaches work in multicultural organizations who have offices all over the world. You have the headquarters and rest of the world dynamic going on. So really the team coach's role is to pay attention to that systemic relationship and to raise the awareness, and I'll use this word a lot, to raise the awareness of the team in the waters in which they're swimming, so that they understand the dynamics that are going on outside of the team that will influence what's going on inside the team. And that's a really key part of taking a systemic view of team coaching. Then the second part was really looking as the team coach as a guide, guiding the team through the learning process. So not setting the agenda, because the agenda is set by the team themselves, If you believe in adult learning theory, you believe that the team will take from the learning what they choose to. It's not a sort of parent-child relationship, it's an equal partnership. But the team's ability and skills, if you like, is to take the team through that learning process and use their capabilities, their presence, their knowledge, their experience to guide the team through the learning process. Being clear at the beginning how you want the end to look. So what's the purpose of the team coaching? What matters to you as a team coach? What matters to the team? And is that aligned? Because if that's not aligned, then chances are there's going to be some quite bumpy, some big bumps, if not cliffs in the road that you might fall off. So being able to read the signs and the signals when you notice that the team has absorbed the learning and is applying the learning. So when you come towards the end of a piece of work, you'll see signs and signals from the team that they're already doing the work that you've developed with them without you needing to support them. So coaching each other, challenging each other, being able to stand in the shoes of their external stakeholders, being able to hold multiple perspectives, hold complexity, being able to look at literally sort of one end of the argument to the other and hold that and talk about it as a team in a system rather than focusing purely on interpersonal dynamics. So that's the team coach as a guide. And then the team coach withdrawal, and this is the bit where it's quite interesting, because both the team coach in the field and the team coach's guide, you move away from the team during the process. So the idea is at the beginning, you're much more interventionist than you are at the end, because the idea as the team learns, you're much lighter touch, much more gentle with the team. Whereas with the relationship, the human relationship, actually it's the reverse. So at the beginning of the relationship, you don't know each other very well. You've got to build trust. You've got to build that ability to be able to be that critical friend. And that takes time. And with some teams, it takes longer than others. And then also a lot of that will also depend on the context and the system in which you're working. So if it's a culture where people don't trust each other, it's very hierarchical, there's a lot of power dynamics going on, sometimes building trust with a team can take a lot longer. There's also the gender element. So that came up in my research, is that some of the female coaches really noticed that gender came into play. So that was quite an interesting aspect, which we can talk about at the end if anyone's got any questions on that. So the team coach withdrawal actually is full of emotion. And when I was interviewing my participants, this became really quite an emotive part of the research, a sense of loss here, a sense of a rite of passage, of paying witness to what had gone before, and to using ceremonies and rituals, so ways of actually marking the end of the team coaching relationship. So a lot of research that I looked at, and there's very limited academic research in team coaching, tends to focus on sort of outcomes, the learning process, but very little actually looks at the relationship between the coach and the client. And one of the things that I noticed and have recommended to people is to also, as coaches, for us to acknowledge our own role in that coaching journey, to recognize the fact that it is our presence, our capabilities, our way of building trust that enables us to get to that end goal with the client, and not to lose ourselves in that and just kind of forget about our role in that, because I think that's massively important. And also to consider and reflect on the impact of coming to an end of a piece of work where you may have been working with a team through, some fairly difficult and challenging times for maybe a year. And that's quite a long-term relationship. And I always say to the coaches, the teams that I coach, there's going to be times during this relationship where you're going to really hate me. and they always laugh, but generally I can see it sometimes in their face. They're like, oh, Rachael, she's such a pain. Because you really press the pain points sometimes. So there's a lot of emotional investment both on behalf of the team and yourself. So it's having that, paying attention to that and recognizing your role and how important that is with the team. And then I'm just going to go down to the next slide. So here really, I hopefully you can see this, because I'm just going to see if I can move that. That's it. Yeah. So the team coach in the field. So some of the things that came out of the research, having that really open, undirected awareness. So just being that kind of open arms, looking at what's going on in the system, bringing that all into you, absorbing it, taking that phenomenological approach. How do I feel when I walk into this organization? What sense do I get? I work with one organization where I was working with the CIO and technology team, and they were literally in a bunker in a building. And when I went to see them, I used to literally feel like this. It had quite a strong impact in terms of their physical space, and also the sense from the rest of the organization that they were locked away and were not approachable. So we did quite a lot of work on that. So that kind of awareness of what's going on, using your bodily sensations, using all your senses to gather as much data as you can. To be able to move between the big macro perspectives and the micro perspectives. So being able to at times be very light touch and playful, and other times being really sharp and focused and pointed to really get to those pain points, as that I mentioned before. This is what I've noticed about this organization. This is how I've noticed people behave with each other. This is the language I've noticed that people use. So, really getting into that, facing into the power, the gender dynamics, the organizational forces. I always kind of think of it in my head as a metaphor of kind of navigating really rough seas and sometimes really calm seas, but that, being able to kind of describe what's going on around you. Through experience, learning to preempt endings by seeing signs that the team or organization isn't ready or the time isn't right for the work. So quite a lot of data came up that, in fact, team coaches sometimes ended assignments early because either the team wasn't in the right place, the external environment wouldn't support the development, or in one case, actually, there was, I think, someone uncovered a fraudulent thing that was going on, so they just had to get out quite quickly. So I think it's kind of that awareness that you don't need to keep ploughing on right to the end. If it's time for you to leave and things aren't right, probably with supervision, take the opportunity to reflect on what you should do. And if you feel you need to bring something to an early close, that's fine. And then a belief and an altruistic desire to contribute to the greater good. So this was a really strong theme that came out in my research, and I think as coaches we won't be surprised by this, but a real desire to develop the team, develop the leaders, develop the organization, so that it was a better place to work and people enjoyed their jobs and they were doing a good job, and being able to hold that empathy for your clients regardless of the nature of the ending, because of course, although the ending may be abrupt, or it may be a bit of they suddenly disappear and never reply to you, which does happen sometimes, being aware that actually there's other things going on in the system, and not to apportion blame, but to just use it as a reflective and learning experience. The next slide. Then in the learning relationship, there was always quite a tension between it being quite organic and evolutionary, because of course the external context is changing all the time, and the desire for the coach or client to measure value, and all the coaches had to be able to hold that dynamic. Being able to read the signs and signals when the team has shifted and changed. So be clear what you're looking for. What are you looking for through your intervention? What changes are you and the team wanting to make? Being absolutely clear that you know what that is. And then once you know what that is, looking for signs and signals. So somebody gave me a lovely example of when they saw a new member of the team being onboarded and inducted by the team. they immediately saw that the work that they'd done together was actually being put into practice, and they could literally see the learning coming to life in front of their eyes, which of course is a wonderful thing as a coach. The end of a client relationship requires intentional and proactive effort from the coach. Some clients, I think, would keep us forever if they could, because they kind of, they quite enjoy the dynamic. And once you get to know people really well, it's sometimes can become a bit too comfortable. That's another thing you have to notice. So what we have to do as coaches is actually bring things to an end. We need to manage that process very carefully in terms of the relational element of it, and really think about how we manage our, if you like, withdrawal from the relationship. And also how we raise awareness, because what we're looking to develop is unconscious competence. So how do we then, at the end of our work, raise the awareness with the team of the learning that they've gone through and experience they've had? Really important that you get them to actually reflect and think about that. And then the end of the relationship is time to remove themselves physically, metaphorically, and your egos. You literally exit to make space for the team to be independent, because the longer you stay, the less likely they are to become independent. So that bit was quite, if you like, slightly parental. And then the human relationship, the bit that we very rarely think about. So that sense of self, how to coach, what we bring, the credibility we bring initially, but then shifting that so that it becomes less about you and more about the team. And then an opportunity to reinforce that sense of self and to sustain it and to have the freedom to leave. And in the end, honouring and recognising the connections and relationship between the coach and the team, and to really celebrate this in a symbolic way at the end. So I'm going to jump through that quickly because I'm going to take us into breakout rooms. I'm noticing the time, and I think, Sam, if we can do a 15-minute breakout, I think that would probably be great.
Yeah, no, I'm all set up.
Brilliant. And what I'd like you to do as we go into breakouts in your small groups is reflect on the endings of your coaching relationships. For those of you that are not team coaches, reflect on the endings in executive coaching. I think that could be also quite an interesting conversation between you all. And just take this, use these ways of reflecting. So be widely focused, sensing and feeling, just let things emerge. Investigating it, don't try and organize your thoughts, don't try and second think yourself. Just work with what's happening in the moment in your groups. Just write down, make notes of everything you sense and you respond to as you're thinking about endings. And just think, as you're in the group together talking about endings, what's happening right now. We just want something that's emergent right now. So Sam, we're ready to go into groups. There we go. But probably the academic paper, I would suggest, will give you the most thorough overview of what we've talked about this evening. So I would absolutely love to hear from you all now about your conversations and what came up for you as we're talking about endings.
Okay, I raised in the question, Rachel, it might be a question for you. Sorry, I raised in the breakout question for you. The difference between ending and completion, do you look at them as the same or are they separate? Because I'm seeing that there can be many different types of ending, but every ending, I think, needs to find its completion at some point. Yeah. And we talked a little bit about having control over endings and times when there is no control over endings, and the different ways that you go about completion from there.
Yeah, I really like that, Chris. Thank you. Yes, so I think that's why when I did my research, I kind of, if you like, looked at 3 different relationships. So as the work comes to it, so there's the work coming to an end, and the work will come to an end either through your own control or not through your own control sometimes. And if we're being realistic, I mean, for those of you who maybe are not experienced team coaches, it does happen, and team coaching is rarely perfect and rarely is neat and tidy with a nice bow tied at the end. So yes, there's the completion of the work. There's the completion, if you like, of your interpretation of the environment and the culture. So you then would hand that on to the team for them to then be aware of their systemic context. The relationship's a really, really interesting one. And I noticed, we were just talking while you were all out, in the poll, that we noticed that some people kind of completely end the relationship, as in they have no more connection with the team. Others kind of just stay in touch with the leader or the sponsor. In my experience, that's it, the majority of cases, that's what happens. And then the final one, that some people said they actually stay in touch with the leader and the team. But of course, we have to differentiate between people as well who are internal or external coaches, because if you all still work in the same company, of course, you're all going to keep in touch. And I think this raises, and actually I mentioned this in my research, raises quite an interesting ethical question as well about relationships and the nature of those relationships, and what sort of relationships you have. So I think there's an interesting reflective point there in terms of, if I am to have a continued relationship with my client, what does that relationship look like, and what's the purpose of that relationship? And if is it just a commercial purpose? Because that, people said that to me. What happens at the end of the relationship? I stop earning money. People actually did say that, and it's true. So are you staying in touch with a client because you want to do more work with them? So, for example, if it's the HR director, they may introduce you to other teams. If it's the CEO, you may work with them individually. You may do organizational development work. You may do other exec coaching work. But I think you need to be clear on your intentions, and reflect on why you're doing that. So that was quite an interesting piece. And then the other bit that came up, that I hadn't really thought about when I first started my research, is the relationship with a co-coach. Because, and I noticed the majority of you tend to work on your own, but I do think there's something about paying attention to the end of the piece of work with your co-coach, and how you bring that to an end, and how you both reflect on the ending and spend time talking about both of your experiences. And it may be that actually that is the end of that particular relation. In other words, you're not going to work with that person again, or you may not work with them for quite a while. So there's paying attention to how you bring that to an end as well. I think it is important. And then if your co-coach is your client, again, having some reflexivity around, well, what does that mean? And where's the beginning, where's the end? How will the nature of our relationship change? And what will that relationship look like? And how we contract around that, and how we set boundaries. So Chris, you sort of sparked off quite a lot of thoughts there, but it's a really great reflection back, and a lovely question. I don't know whether anyone else has got anything that they want to raise. I'd be really interested to hear from people what emotions talking about this raised, or what sort of feelings or senses that you came up with.
Yeah, two comments. One is that on your slide in the learning relationship, I think one of your bullet points was begin with the end in mind. And certainly in the group where we would, the breakout group I was in, we were talking about how you might structure an ending, and what is coaching and what isn't. In my experience, it's quite important, even as part of the contracting, to talk about how we'll complete our work together. And I did have quite an interesting conversation recently with a team I've just finished working with, when I used the word ending, because the team was also ending because the organization was restructuring, and it triggered a lot of emotion. Yes. And when I reframed it as completion, there was such relief and such joy to actually complete it. It was, the semantics was so important at that point. I think team coaching, as you said, none of it goes perfectly or smoothly all the time. It can be messy. Yeah. So I like to share where things haven't quite gone perfectly. And I noticed that I felt nervous about doing that, even though I knew some of the people in my breakout room. Yeah. And I think some of that is because the supervision that's available for team coaching is not quite there yet. I know it's developing, but a lot of supervisors have not actually They supervised people who were doing individual coaching. I know Sylviane's involved in this, but I think the supervision of team coaching is something else that needs to be looked at, explored, and thought about, because it's very important. One last point about the co-coaching. So I have a co-coach for a team coaching I'm doing at the moment who's internal. And for her, it's a learning relationship. So I've needed to talk to her about the other elements, particularly the systemic element, because we've been trying for 3.5 months to get an agreement on the start date for the first team coaching session with them.
Right, okay, that's interesting data, isn't it? Yeah.
It is, yeah. So I'll stop there and give someone else a chance to comment.
That's lovely, Cheryl. I thank you for that. It's lovely to hear from an experienced coach as well. And to reinforce that you don't get the neat endings with the bows. I do think endings is a very emotive word, and I kind of use it intentionally as well, because I think that we're quite avoidant of that term as well, although I do understand in the context you were talking about, you know, if the team's coming to an end because the restructure, that's a whole different environment to be working in. But I do think there is something about getting people to be comfortable with talking about endings and not avoiding them, which of course we all notice a lot. Now I had somebody had their hand up a minute ago and I can't see where she's gone, but oh, there you are, Savannah, do speak up.
Good evening, everybody. Or good morning. I don't know if there are some people from Australia. Okay, good. Two things. Yes, there is for the moment a pilot group in the team coach supervision that was created by Liz Lewis, David Clutterberg, Transcend, etc. We are 15 in this group, and we are starting, and we clearly speak about an accreditation for team coach supervision, also, which is a very good thing. It's ongoing. The second thing is that you have to think at the ending when you start. That's very true. And in the methodology, I have a technique that I explained in the subgroup. That is, I call it the fading out. In fact, yes. As I put the cursor, I start as a facilitator, because who holds the system, who holds the framework, holds the system. Okay, so it's about the modus vivendi, how we're going to make it successful. And in the beginning, I start facilitating, and then I fade away. That is, my ending role is to be as useless as possible, yes, as an observer. So literally in the beginning, I'm in the group, and then I progressively move in the table so that I'm outside the table for the last session. This is one way of fading away. Yeah. But for that, you need to distribute the roles. This is the delegated functions. It's in my book, Coaching Excellence. It's a methodology created by Alain Cardon in France. And in fact, everyone has a role. And so you can have facilitator, and it's a role that moves. You have coach of the day, you have pacer, you have this decision maker. And that way, the group is really autonomous. So you fade away in terms of posture. And another way to fade away is by tempo. That is, at the beginning, for instance, I have management team. They meet every month. And then after 1 year, I say, hey, come on, guys, this is about to be enough. And it's in the contract. Then it will be every 2 months, then every 3 months, then every 4 months, then every 6 months, and then poof. And perhaps it's shorter. I have a team for the moment. I see the team every 5 months, and it's fine. We are happy to meet. They explain me half of the meetings to explain, because they are so proud to tell what they are. So we are celebrating together. And then it's about setting the objective for next time. And me, I just facilitate a little bit, but you know, this is clear. It must be in the contract. And when you have a clear, you have trust. And people, you are in interrelationship also. There is no codependence, no emotional dependence, and you feel free.
And also, just to say, there's a question from Linda asking, what is meant by paying witness?
Oh, yes. Yeah. So paying witness, I mean, is actually acknowledging and surfacing and actually talking about. So rather than just assuming or leaving it under the carpet. I did see another hand up somewhere. No?
I put my hand up just briefly. Tana here. Hi. In our group, I mean, we're not most of us are not experienced team coaches, but we are executive coaches mainly. But we did talk a lot about the importance of reflection, of allowing time for reflection at the ending, and making sure that that is thought about from the beginning, but that allows really us and the client both to fade out, but also to reflect back on the journey that has happened and the learning.
Yeah, no, it's a lovely point. Absolutely. It's just giving yourself the space and time, as you say, Anna, to actually appreciate what you've done together. Is a lovely feeling at the end when that happens, and that reflective space. Fantastic. And I would just add that I'm also a team coach supervisor, so I'll throw that in there. So myself and a lady called Max Gooding work together, and I think my website's on my slides, so you can look me up if you want to, but my name is quite easy to find because I'm the only one in the world, I believe, called Rachael Hanley-Browne. So anyway, lovely to see you all, and thank you so much for coming along to the session, and hopefully see you all another time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye. Merci.
Bye.
Thank you, Rachel.
Bye.
That was great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you a lot.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.